Imagine you're instructed to sit in a completely quiet room, close your eyes, and vividly picture yourself being flayed alive. Like you're told to imagine your skin being peeled off, inch by agonizing inch, or alternatively, picture yourself being slowly broiled alive on an iron gridiron.
And the crazy thing is, this isn't some torture manual we're talking about here. This is actually a 13th century guide to finding true love.
Right. Because normally when we think about spiritual growth or, meditation today, there is this massive expectation of comfort. I mean, you open an app, you hear some like gentle rain sounds, and a soothing voice tells you to just breathe, let go of your thoughts and accept yourself. It's calming, it's safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We kind of treat the inner life like a warm bath now. It's entirely designed to reduce stress and just validate our current state of being.
But then you step into the world of medieval mysticism and suddenly, well, that warm bath is just gone. We are looking at a spiritual landscape it's startling. It's a complete deliberate jolt to the system.
Oh, absolutely. It is the absolute definition of a radical psychological shock.
So today, we are opening up a truly fascinating source for you. We're taking a deep dive into a rare 1642 English translation of a 13th century Franciscan text. It's called Stimulus Divini Amoris, which translates to the Goad of Divine Love. And this is a text deeply associated with Brother James of Milan and the man known as the Seraphic Doctor, Saint Bonaventure.
And we should probably clarify that title, right? The Seraph Doctor.
Yeah.
In medieval theology, Saint Bonaventure was known for an intellect that was so burning with divine love, it was actually compared to the seraphim, which are the highest, most fiery order of angels. He didn't just study theology. He viewed it as this consuming fire.
Wow. So our mission for you on this deep dive is to explore how Bonaventure and these medieval mystics used shockingly visceral, highly poetic, and sometimes, frankly, deeply unsettling imagery to bridge the massive gap between human apathy and divine love.
Because it's really crucial to understand right away, this text is not a gentle, passive meditation. It is a radical psychological toolkit. It's engineered to completely destroy the human ego, to build a state of extreme empathy, and to fundamentally alter how a person views suffering and love.
So before we can even get to the love part of this text, we really have to talk about that aggressive title, the Goad of Divine Love. I mean, a goad is a sharp, spiked stick used by farmers to drive cattle. It's a painful tool. Why pair that with a concept like love?
Yeah, the 17th century English translator actually anticipates that modern readers, modern for 1642, might be put off by this imagery.
Yeah.
So he writes a defense of the title right at the very beginning, and he asks the reader point blank, he just says, "Are you not a beast?"
That's so direct. He argues that if you're a sinner, you're functionally acting like a beast. But he uses this really fascinating reference to King David from the Psalms. The text invites us to recognize ourselves as a jumentum, which translates to a godly beast of burden. The idea is that we're meant to be, animals that help carry a load, but because we're so incredibly stubborn, we occasionally need a sharp prick from that spiked stick just to keep moving forward.
Look at the underlying medieval view of human nature here. In their framework, humans aren't inherently floating toward enlightenment. We aren't naturally, ascending toward goodness. We are heavily grounded, distracted, sluggish creatures. We're weighed down by the material world, by our appetites, and by our own self-interest.
It kind of makes me think of having a brutal, no-nonsense personal trainer, or a really jarring alarm clock. We're these stubborn creatures who vastly prefer to just hit the snooze button on our own spiritual growth, We want the easy way out. And this text is basically saying that to wake up to reality, we actually require a painful poke.
Exactly. And that goad, in the context of this book, is the specific act of meditating on Christ's extreme physical suffering. That is the sharp stick. It's the necessary shock to our nervous system to overcome our natural, heavy apathy.
Okay, so once that goad wakes you up, what exactly are you supposed to be looking at with your newly opened eyes? The text tells us that once we're awake, we need to read. But the book it tells us to read is, it's incredibly unconventional.
Yeah, to illustrate this, the source shares this wonderful historical anecdote about St. Thomas Aquinas. So Aquinas goes to visit St. Bonaventure, who's his contemporary, and he asks to see his library. Aquinas is this massive intellectual, right? And he wants to know the source of Bonaventure's profound wisdom and learning. What massive volumes is he consulting every day?
And Bonaventure just points to a crucifix hanging on his wall and says, "Behold where my book is."
Yes, and here is where the text introduces one of its most vivid and elaborate extended metaphors. It instructs the reader to view Christ's physical body during the Passion as a literal, physical book.
It's so detailed, too. The text maps the entire process of medieval bookmaking onto this physical suffering. It says Christ's flesh is the paper, like the whitest, finest parchment. The Garden of Gethsemane, where he sweat blood under immense emotional pressure, is the printing press or the wine press, squeezing out the red ink.
And it delves deeply into the grammar of this book, too. The text argues that our small sins are the lowercase letters, and our mortal capital sins are the capital letters.
It even covers the punctuation marks, which is wild. The thorns from the crown are the periods. The whip marks from the scourging are the commas.
But the most important parts of this grammar, the absolute foundation of this language, are the 5 physical wounds on the hands, feet, and side. The text actually calls these the vowels.
Wait, the vowels. Out of all the grammatical concepts they could have chosen, why focus on vowels?
Well, think about how human language works. A vowel is the only letter that makes a perfect, distinct sound on its own. Furthermore, a vowel is absolutely required to pronounce any word or syllable. You cannot speak without them. So the text claims that without those 5 wounds, no prayer can be heard by God, and no sin can be pardoned. The vowels are what make the language of redemption actually vocalize in heaven.
I do have to pause and push back on this a little bit, though, because, isn't this imagery of a human body being beaten, smeared with ink, and hammered like a bookbinder's tool incredibly graphic? It feels really dark.
To a modern reader, yeah, it is undeniably graphic. But we have to look at how this functioned in the 13th century. This was a deliberate, genius mnemonic device, like a memory palace for scholars and monks. You have to remember who this was written for. These were men whose entire daily lives revolved around physical manuscripts.
Oh, right, because they're copying texts all day.
Exactly. They worked with parchment, which is literally animal skin. They worked with red ink, binding tools, and styluses.
So by mapping grammar, punctuation, and bookbinding onto the Passion, the author is basically hijacking their daily routine. Every single time a monk opened a physical book in the Scriptorium to study, he would be immediately, viscerally reminded of the cost of his redemption.
Yeah, the very tools of his mundane daily life became these inescapable triggers for spiritual reflection. Reading this book of the body wasn't just a passive intellectual exercise. Once a monk successfully visualizes this horrific book and fully grasps the cost of his redemption, what does that realization actually do to his psyche? According to the text, it creates an unbearable emotional gravity.
Which turns the believer into what the translator calls a lodestone. And the translator uses a brilliant French pun here, the word aimant, which translates to both lover and lodestone, or magnet.
True love, according to this medieval framework, isn't just a fleeting emotion. It's an undeniable physical magnetic attraction. If you truly see the love in this book, you are pulled toward it, like iron to a magnet.
And the text gives us historical examples of this magnetic pull in action. It talks about St. Francis, who was so drawn by this magnet that he became, in the text's words, like a red-hot coal in the middle of a fire, completely consumed by love, eventually receiving the stigmata, the physical wounds of Christ, miraculously appearing on his own body.
It also highlights St. Louis of Toulouse. Here's a man who was literally in line for a royal kingdom. He possessed the purple robes, the scepter, the absolute height of earthly political power. And he abandons all of it to wear a coarse, itchy, gray habit as a Franciscan friar.
The text uses him to prove that this magnetic pull of divine love is fundamentally stronger than the ultimate earthly power. But, the book doesn't just want you to sit back and admire these saints like they're superheroes. It provides instructions on how you can build this exact level of empathy yourself.
This is where we return to that intense thought experiment you mentioned at the start of our deep dive. The text literally instructs you, the reader, to sit down and imagine being flayed alive or broiled on a gridiron. It forces you to vividly picture the absolute worst physical torment imaginable and then demands you realize that Christ suffered more for your sake.
Let's explore that mechanism because, how does visualizing extreme physical agony actually lead to love? Modern psychology tells us to avoid trauma, to protect our mental peace, definitely not to vividly recreate torture in our own minds. What was their underlying logic there?
Well, in the medieval framework, human pride is an incredibly thick armor. It protects our ego. And the only thing sharp enough to pierce that armor, the goad, is an overwhelming sense of unearned sacrifice. Love in this context is not a warm, fuzzy feeling of affection. It's an active, agonizing participation in the pain of the beloved.
So, to truly love is to be drawn so entirely out of your own self-interest that you would genuinely rather suffer yourself than see your beloved suffer. It's empathy taken to its absolute logical extreme.
Exactly. And once this magnetic pull draws the believer this incredibly close, they don't just witness the suffering from the sidelines. The text actually instructs the mystic to literally enter the wounds.
Yeah, we move from extreme empathy into full-blown surreal mysticism here. The text describes St. Bonaventure's ecstatic vision of entering the physical wounds of Christ. He treats the wounds as an open shop full of spices and medicine.
The language is staggeringly immersive. He speaks of sleeping inside the wounds, eating inside the wounds, living his entire life inside them. There's even this surreal imagery of being born from the wounds, mingling the Virgin Mary's breast milk with Christ's blood to make a spiritual drink of salvation.
Mary's role in this text is absolutely crucial too. The text says her heart was pierced with the exact same sword of sorrow as her son. It uses this mind-bending philosophical phrase to describe her. It says she becomes the continent in the thing contained.
We should probably break that down because to a modern ear, the word continent sounds like a landmass, like North America or Europe.
Right, yeah. What exactly does that phrase mean in this context?
So in medieval philosophy, a continent is simply a container. It's something holding something else. The paradox the text is playing with here is that Mary's sorrow acts as a container for the universe's sorrow, even while she herself is physically and spiritually contained within that very universe. She's holding the grief of the world while the world holds her.
I have to admit, reading through these sections, I just kept wondering how a modern person is supposed to process this. It sounds like spiritual virtual reality. It's a sci-fi level of immersion. You are mentally shrinking down and living inside a cosmic wound.
It absolutely reads like virtual reality. But for the medieval mystic, the wounds were the ultimate safe space. By mentally climbing into the physical wounds of a tortured body, the mystic is actually transitioning from earthly pain into cosmic understanding. It's a literal gateway.
It's not just a personal gateway, though, right? Because the text scales this up to a massive cosmic level. It maps this physical, bleeding flesh onto the entire angelic hierarchy.
Yeah, you have to understand the medieval concept of the great chain of being. They believed the universe was a strict hierarchy, stretching from rocks and plants up to humans, and then through various choirs of angels, all the way up to God.
And the text maps the events of the Passion directly onto those angelic choirs. The seraphim, who are the highest, most fiery angels, represent the burning fervor of this love. The cherubim, the angels of knowledge, represent the profound truth revealed in the suffering.
The author even rereads ancient Old Testament stories through this bloody cosmic lens. Like take the story of Abraham feeding a tender fatted calf to 3 visiting angels in the book of Genesis. The text argues that the calf is actually a symbol of Christ, Abraham is God the Father, and the 3 angels represent the Trinity.
Wait, really? So the Father sacrifices the Son to satisfy the hunger of the Trinity for ultimate justice and mercy. That's intense. It's claiming that every single thing in the universe, from the highest order of angels to ancient historical events, points back to this singular, bloody act of love.
Yes, the universe is entirely oriented around this sacrifice.
So how does a mystic take this cosmic, out-of-body, virtual reality where you're living inside a wound and, use it to navigate the grocery store on a Tuesday? You can't just walk around in modern society vibrating with angelic fervor.
The text is fully aware of that, actually.
Yeah.
This is what makes it a practical manual and not just a book of ecstatic poetry. It provides highly specific rules for daily grounded life.
The source outlines these 11 devices for daily progress. Device number 1 is reputing yourself as the absolute worst, vilest person among all others.
Yeah. Another crucial device is hating nothing in the world except your own sin and actively loving extreme poverty.
Let's pause on that. Why did medieval Franciscans believe that loving extreme poverty was a psychological superpower?
Because if you truly love poverty, you strip away the fear of loss. If you own nothing and desire nothing, you have absolutely nothing to protect. Your ego has no territory to defend. It makes you spiritually untouchable by the anxieties of the material world.
Wow. And that feeds directly into another device, the absolute prohibition against judging anyone else. The text argues that you have no idea what grace is doing in secret inside another person's soul. If you genuinely consider yourself the worst, most vile creature in the room, you have no high ground from which to judge your neighbor.
It also includes a strict mandate for radical hospitality. The text notes that Christ, while hanging in agony on the cross, welcomed a literal convicted thief into paradise. The argument is simple but devastating. If Christ can welcome a criminal into eternal heaven while he is actively bleeding to death, you have zero excuse for not welcoming difficult people into your own earthly home.
When you look at these devices, you realize how profoundly they reframe human relationships. It's a razor-sharp contrast to modern culture. I mean, today, our version of self-care is entirely built on affirming the ego. You know, you are perfect exactly as you are. Set your boundaries, protect your peace, cut toxic people out of your life.
Yeah, this text is offering a radical anti-ego workout. Its version of self-care is looking in the mirror and saying, you are a total mess, you are the absolute worst, but you are infinitely loved by God anyway.
Which is wild because today we are arguably more isolated than ever because our egos are so well protected and our boundaries are so high. But if your starting baseline in life is, I am the absolute worst and everyone around me is infinitely precious, it becomes completely impossible to be offended by a rude comment at the grocery store or a slight at work.
It's a terrifying thought experiment, but you can see how it completely bulletproofs a person against modern social anxiety. It completely destroys human pride. It turns every single interaction you have into an act of total service. It eliminates envy. You cannot be jealous of someone if you truly believe they are a precious soul bought at a cosmic price, and you are just a godly beast of burden meant to serve them.
Let's look at the incredible journey we've taken today through this 13th century text. We started with the harsh realization that our heavy, stubborn human nature needs the sharp poke of a goad to wake up from its apathy.
And from there, we learned to read the grammar of the divine book, utilizing those brilliant mnemonic devices to see the cost of love written in physical wounds.
We felt the magnetic pull, the aimant of extreme ego-destroying empathy, realizing that true love requires suffering with the beloved. We found a surreal sanctuary by virtually climbing inside those wounds to understand the cosmic hierarchy of the universe.
And finally, we saw how that intense, mystical experience isn't meant to keep a person staring up into the clouds. It's engineered to fuel a highly practical life of radical, humble, non-judgmental service to others in the mundane reality of daily life.
Imagine you're that 13th century Franciscan. You don't have podcasts or self-help apps or modern therapy. Your primary tool for transformation is this visceral, graphic meditation. We know the imagery we've explored today is archaic and, frankly, shocking to modern sensibilities.
But the core psychological truth underneath all that blood and all that medieval bookbinding remains incredibly potent. True love requires us to step outside our own carefully protected egos. It demands that we deeply, actively empathize with the pain of others, rather than just protecting our own peace. I want to leave you with one final lingering image from this source text. It's something we haven't touched on yet, but it's arguably the most profound theological thought in the entire book. The author firmly believed that at the end of the world, during the Last Judgment, the actual physical instruments of the Passion, the iron nails, the spear, the thorny crown, will be physically present in heaven.
But, and this is key, they will not be there as objects of horror or trauma. No. The text says they will be displayed as glorious trophies of love. The very things that cause the ultimate agony are transformed into eternal badges of honor, which leaves you with a profound question to explore on your own after this deep dive is over. If the things that cause the ultimate pain can be transformed into the ultimate symbols of love, what instruments of suffering in your own life might one day be viewed not as ugly scars, but as the very tools that built your capacity to love?
The goad might hurt, but it gets us moving.
Thanks for taking the plunge with us.